So, Alan, it's good to see you again. You just mentioned about Bhikkhu Buddhadasa's uh, set of talks that he gave to a retreat, um, basically for Santikaro. And so Santikaro then did the translation that's been published, the book on Anapanasati, a manual for serious beginners.
Yeah.
I
Right here.
don't think I don't think that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa quite understood the word serious in English, or he would have changed it. That a better word to be used for that would be a manual for enthusiastic beginners,
Hmm.
or maybe they were making a pun on uh, getting the beginners out of their serious.
It
But the
could be.
connotation is that this is a manual that is designed for those who actually want to get some value out of it. They're serious enough that they're going to actually do the practice.
Right.
So I think that that was the direction it was going in. But in Thailand, especially, the word serious has a connotation. Is one of the few words that most Thai people actually know now, and that the word serious, it actually comes out of Vietnam
Hmm.
in the sense that the RNR, the American troops, would come to Bangkok, and you can hear the bravado and the anguish of war.
Hmm.
And when they're talking, they're excited and emphasizing and whatnot like that, and then within a few seconds they'll say, and I'm serious about this. And so the Thai people have gotten that idea of seriousness actually means angry. To be
Hmm.
serious is to be angry.
Interesting.
And so that's the connotation that has been picked up over the years is what serious means. And obviously, that book is not about a meditation for uh, people that's going to help them become more angry, but rather um, that's just why I would think that it would be better if we use the word enthusiastic, a
Right.
manual for enthusiastic beginners.
Interesting. Yeah. So a manual for angry beginners to let go of their anger, perhaps.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, the book it was translated by Santikaro Bhikkhu.
Hmm. Yeah.
Do you know anything about him?
Uh, we could use this whole talk about my relationship with him. I was already at Wat Suan Mok when he arrived,
Mhm.
and he stayed longer. Uh, we were ordained at approximately the same time. I was ordained in late 2084. No, excuse me, 1984, and he was ordained in 1985. He was surprised when he got back to Wat Suan Mok from because they sent him to Wat Chulapatan in Bangkok to one of the main teachers up there. That in fact, Achan Panyananda, his Upajjhaya, was the abbot of the largest temple in Thailand, which was also uh, devoted to Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. I mean, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa really is a major element in Thailand.
Mhm.
And so that's where Santikaro went to ordain, to where I was ordained locally here by the, let us call it the Sangha aristocracy of South Thailand.
Mm.
My preceptor was Kesa Thero, the Sangharaj of South Thailand.
Mm.
So um, basically, Santikaro came with a major skill of Thai language, because he learned Thai language in the Peace Corps and was in the refugee camps. That's why he was in Thailand. And when the refugee camps started to close, that left him with not much of a job, but he was in Thailand, up in northern Thailand with the refugee camps. And there he learned about Bhikkhu Buddhadasas, and so he takes off with his translation skills and winds up at Wat Suan Mok in 1984. And that was his position, and so that was how he was used. It was as a translator.
Mm-hmm.
To where I had already been in India, had been with Goenka for 3 years, had been with Swami Muktananda, and spent some time with Rajneesh, and had been putting in about 10 years of solid meditation and Buddhist studies practice, and found out about Bhikkhu Buddhadasa in India. And so I came. And so our relationships were different, because I was in the Dhamma. But Santikaro was into the Thai language. That's why he spent time with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa doing translations, to where my time with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was with the actual Dhamma.
Mm. Interesting.
So I can go on and on and on, but yeah, I know him well. Haven't had any contact with him recently. I sent a donation to his organization a year ago or so.
Yeah, the work seems to be interesting, sort of collaborative in a way. So to describe the book a bit, so there's 9 chapters, and then at the end there's a translator's conclusion, summary, and suggestions for practice,
Mm-hmm.
which is this nice little section that Sankara seems to have written himself, with just basically giving different pointers, filling in little gaps here, making different points. And then it ends with a translation of the Anapanasati Sutta. And so
Yes, at the very end of the book is actually a translation of the entire Anapanasati Sutta.
And to be honest, when I first read it, it looked a little idiosyncratic to me. You know, there were some word choices in there that were quite different from, Bhikkhu Bodhi and what I'd seen in the Thich Nhat Hanh translation. But as I read through the book and saw Bhikkhu Buddhadasa's explanation, it all made sense. I was like,
Good.
oh, that's an interesting word choice. And now I kind of feel that I prefer this version. But, we'll eventually get to that, those word choices, and and see what you think of those translations too. So, so just my initial impression of this book. So, the experience that I have, limited as it is, sort of comes, I think, from the Burmese side of things. And so, based primarily, it seems, in the Satipatthana Sutta, which seems to be sort of the reoccurring sort of foundation, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And I would say that my impression initially, although now I see that this was completely wrong, was that the Anapanasati Sutta was just sort of a teaching about how to do breathing. And so, my feeling had been, well, I think I know how to do breathing at this point. You focus on the sensations at the nose and okay, so now we don't really need to. So I think the feeling was it was maybe like a beginner's sutta, and that it just focused on the breath. But having read this and sort of what I've come to see is that couldn't have been more wrong. And in fact, what seems to be in here, particularly with the 16 trainings, is a complete system practice that essentially, it is complete unto itself, and that can lead up to, full enlightenment. Essentially, I mean, it goes all the way.
Not only does it lead up to, but that leading up to can be done in a couple of mind moments, a second or two, which is something that's kind of missed.
Yeah, so
because everybody has the idea that it's a long, hard struggle.
Interesting, yeah.
And this book should be pointing out that, hey, when you practice correctly, you get immediate results. It's for the here now. It's for this very life. But not this very life that you're going to be living 10 years from now, but this very life that you're living now.
Right. Yeah, and I think I know the ways in which you're talking. I think I know what you're referring to there. And one other thing I'll sort of say about it is that not only are these apparently like 16 trainings that you can engage in, but in a way it's also another sort of map of insights. So each training is a deepening of a particular set of insights.
Let us say it's a deepening of a way of gaining skills. And part of the skills that we will learn is how to look.
Right. Right.
Okay,
so
what to look for, how to look. And so the map is basically just like a physical map. First off, the map is not the territory.
Right.
And that a map will only have a few of the roads. That in fact, the more roads that you put on a map, the more cluttered that map gets. Okay? And so when you say, well, I want a complete map of the town, that means that not only do you put where the streets are, you put all the houses in place, you put where the dog houses are, then you put in all the water mains and put where every water meter is, then you put in all the power poles and where every power line is, and you can see that, wait a minute, we can't make that kind of a map.
Right.
And in fact, the plumbers will have their own map that they care about where the pipes are. And the electricians will have their own map of the city that they only care about where the electrics are. And then some people will only be concerned with where the streets are, and others will be concerned only with where individual businesses and things like that are. So depending upon the interest, the map has some indications, but it's not the whole show. The map is not the territory. Okay,
Right.
That's an important point to understand. Now, if we can back up just a bit about Anapanasati, in the Anapanasati Sutta there that you have, it will say that Anapanasati is to be practiced in the sense of the skill developments for the fulfillment of the Satipatthana, for the four foundations of mindfulness. Now, that's an important, exquisitely important point, and I'll get back to it in a moment. And then we practice the Satipatthana for the fulfillment of the Sambhojana, to bring up the Enlightenment Factors. Now, it took me a long time to figure out that the Sambhojana, the Enlightenment Factors, are the fulfillment of the skills that are being developed with the Eightfold Noble Path. They come right in order. Right mindfulness, right investigation, right effort, or actually energy and joy and relaxation, all of those things that are part of the seven factors of enlightenment, actually are skills that are to be developed from the Eightfold Noble Path, and those individual skills then are mentioned in the Anapanasati Sutta as training skills or training. Thus, one trains oneself is the often the verbs that's used. Okay, and then we practice the Sambojana, the seven factors of enlightenment, for the fulfillment of knowledge and deliverance. The word deliverance is Bhikkhu Bodhi's word in there, but it's knowledge and freedom, okay? Or it's panya moksha, wisdom and freedom. So, this is the actual perspective that we do. But a lot of people think this word fulfillment means over a long period of time. That if I practice Anapanasati long enough, it will fulfill the Sambojana, or excuse me, the Satipatthana. And then many more years later, practicing the Satipatthana through Anapanasati will then give the seven factors of enlightenment. But a much better way of looking at it is that if we practice Anapanasati right now, we are fulfilling the seven factors of enlightenment and the four foundations of mindfulness right now, gaining that knowledge and that deliverance right now. That's the part that a lot of people have trouble with because they see the Anapanasati practice like everything else in the West. It's a long, hard slog. A PhD starts with ABCs in the sixth grade, and 16 to 20 years later, you finally get your diploma. Here in Anapanasati, we start out with a PhD with our first breath, if we're practicing correctly.
That's interesting. So, would you say that there's a sort of a non-dual element within Bhikkhu Buddhadasa's teachings? Because as I read, there were certain parts that I didn't recognize from, I don't know, from whatever, the milieu that I have been reading from, and we'll get to it. We'll get to some of those parts.
Okay.
But it seems like
the answer to that is absolutely yes. And that there are some ingredients in there that are hidden away, some nuggets that you can see actually there. But I can give you some English language words that will help you to clearly understand that issue about the difference between unification versus duality. Okay? And the words that we're going to use is nurturing and criticism, or critical. The critical mind is the mind that looks for the good and wants the good and strives for the good and tries to get the good. And the critical mind is also the one who sees the bad, tries to destroy the bad, throw the bad out, and get rid of it. Good and bad, then, are the two dualities. And you can see that that's a major issue in some of the religions. Within Christianity, Armageddon and the great big war between good and evil, right?
Yeah.
That is duality. You almost have to have two gods. You can't have just one benevolent God. You've got to have a devil too, because that's the other side. All right? But then there is the concept of the gladdening the mind, the unification of mind, the nurturing of the mind, which is non-critical. We get out of the criticism into nurturing. Everything is okay. Everything is fine. Don't have to look at what's good and bad and try to keep the good and throw out the bad. Everything's all right. Let's stop looking at it from what's useful and not useful. Let's look at it as everything is marvelous. Everything is joyful. Everything is fine. Everything's all right. The world doesn't need to be fixed. that the only thing that needs to be fixed can be fixed immediately just by changing our attitude, changing our mind, changing our thought from unwholesome critical thought into wholesome nurturing thought. So yes, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is very big on unification as opposed to duality.
That's very interesting, and you get elements of it sort of peeking through at various points. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to kind of read through, I'm going to read some different quotes to you, and we can just kind of use them as the basis, to
Okay.
comment on them.
My only request is that these quotes not be pages long each one, but just a paragraph or less, so that I can keep track of what points to look for.
No, for sure. Okay, no problem. So the first chapter is called "Why Practice Dhamma." Okay, and it begins with a definition of the Anapanasati, and then he sort of summarizes the four. What are they called again? The four sections.
Okay. Many people call those tetrads. I don't know why, because the word tet has the word three in it. These are actually four quadrads.
Okay. Yeah, right. Okay. So he says that the actual meaning of Anapanasati is quite broad. To recall anything at all with sati while breathing in and breathing out.
Yep.
But then goes on to say
did it say mindfully breathing in and out, or just breathing in and out?
It said, with recalling anything at all with sati while breathing in and
sati while breathing in and sati while breathing out. That's an important point that a lot of people will skip through with that. Okay, that the sati is not for just what we're looking at or what skill we're developing in a moment, but it also has to do with sati on the in-breath and sati on the out-breath. And there's an important reason for that. And that is that sati is the skill that we're trying to develop. And so what that means is we're going to use the breath as something that's recurring almost like the tick of a clock. Except that the clock is running slower with an in-breath and an out-breath, and yet we're going to remember that this is a long in-breath and that this is a long out-breath. That's part of the reason why sati is actually controlling the breath as opposed to letting the breath go back to what we would call normal as opposed to natural. That in fact what we're actually practicing with Anapanasati is to remember to have a natural breath rather than having a normal breath. Okay, now the normal breathing is actually mindless in the sense that it's controlled by the very deep part of the reptilian brain that's right down at the brain stem. It's in right back there behind the ears, okay? And this is the area of the body or the area of the brain that controls the breathing when it is done normally. And the whole point about the reptilian brain is that it's in survival mode. That's the whole point of it. That this is also the seat of survival instincts. Our instinctual survival mechanisms are built there, and that part of the brain is operating all the time, and it's very efficient. When I say operating all the time, that means that if you went to sleep, you'd die. If you really went to sleep, if this part of the brain went to sleep, then your heart would stop breathing or stop beating and you would stop breathing. So there's something there that keeps that going. However, we also have done enough research with MRIs to note, and this is actually quite surprising, so it was a big deal, that when people are actually controlling the breathing, doing sati with it, then the frontal cortex lights up. In this area and in this area here, two areas of the frontal cortex light up and so this is a point that's really very, very interesting. Is this controlling the breath then activates the higher part of the brain? As well as by doing the breathing, we're taking in more oxygen and we're giving that part of the brain more juice, more oxygen, and our thoughts are cleaner. The fuel burns brighter. Okay. And so this is the part of the reason why controlling the breath for the long, deep in breath and controlling the breath for the long, deep out breath has so much benefit because it benefits the physiological, it benefits the brain itself, as well as this training of keep remembering and keep remembering and keep coming back to what's going on over and over and over again. So that's an important point with the Anapanasati that is kind of missed, even though Goenka and the Burmese method and all of that, they talk about Anapana, they talk about the breathing, but it's only in the Anapanasati Sutta itself where it actually points out in rigorous detail that you're kind of glossing over here. But that point about that it's sati of the in-breath and it's sati of the out-breath, not that you're having sati while you're breathing in normally, but rather the sati is on the breathing itself. This is the beginning foundation of paying attention to the body, is by learning to control it, learning to control the breathing and noticing with that breath control the various things that are happening with the body, that you can feel like you're beginning to get energized, that you're waking up. Not only that, but you can feel the touch of the cloth, you can feel the wind, you can feel vibrantly alive. That's part of the practice. And that this is the part that's built into the Anapanasati that is kind of missing in the Satipatthana. And so when they concentrate only on the Satipatthana, they're missing out on many of the details. An example of that is that, yes, the hindrances are in fact talked about in the Satipatthana Sutta to where they're kind of glossed over, not directly referenced in the Anapanasati Sutta. But even in the Satipatthana Sutta, it says with each of the hindrances is this should be abandoned. But again, the students, when they read that, they think, oh, well, that means it needs to eventually be abandoned.
Yeah.
Instead of right now. As soon as you get it, you got to abandon that hindrance right now. Okay, so this is one of the changes of the emphasis, and that's why in Thailand and in the community associated with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, that they go to the Satipatthana through the Anapanasati Sutta, and we do the Anapanasati Sutta through the Eightfold Noble Path. And when we do it that way, then we can get a much better idea of what's really going on, and that if we just start with and stay in the Satipatthana Sutta alone. Because these tiny little details that are in the Satipatthana Sutta get missed.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. That all really good clarifications there. And so the next bit says 4 objects to contemplate. And now he's going to begin to summarize before he expands on the 16 training. But he says, what are the proper, correct, and necessary objects of contemplation every time we breathe in and breathe out? There are 4 proper objects of contemplation: the secrets of kaya, body; secrets of Vedana, feeling;
Vedana.
Vedana.
Kaya Nupassana, Veda Nupassana, Sita Nupassana, and Dhamma Nupassana. Yes.
I'm butchering some of these words until the secrets of Sita, mind; and the secrets of Dhamma.
Mm-hmm.
So he just sort of lays out
It's interesting the choice of the word there that Santikaro used is the word secret,
yeah.
as opposed to merely hidden or unrevealed.
Right.
Secret has the word itself has the quality that it's intentionally secret rather than mislaid. Okay,
Yeah.
so you have to look at that word secret in the way that these things are not really secret, they're just self-evident, but we don't look, they need to be uncovered,
It,
investigated.
it's interesting, right? And I'd skip this bit, but one of the first things in the book is the definition of Dhamma, and it says the simple explanation of Dhamma is the secret of nature that must be understood in order to develop life for the highest possible benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then he says, in order to develop our lives to the fullest, we must know life's secrets. Life is a matter of nature. Nature in this context means something that exists within itself, by itself, of itself, and as its own law.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about the Dhamma here.
Right.
Okay. We can look at the word Dhamma in a more broad sense also. You could go so broad as to use the word Dhamma and translate it into the English language thing, Thing, and then it fully describes it because the Dhamma actually is like the Pali word for thing. So when we talk about the Buddha Dhamma, we're just talking about the Buddha's thing. And when we're looking at the objects in our environment, in our world, everything we call a thing, everything, every Dhamma. That's the way that we look at it, that everything is a Dhamma, everything is a happening, everything is, there it is, it exists. And the higher Dhamma then would be that is when we live our lives according to the Dhamma. That we pay attention to the Dhamma, and let us say, perhaps a misunderstanding would be to pay tribute to the Dhamma, but another way of looking at it is we have duty to the Dhamma. And then, in fact, dukkha itself is when we're not giving tribute to the Dhamma, or we're not doing our duty. If my duty is to do this and I don't do it, then I'm going to suffer for not having done my duty. Okay, and so a lot of what we are practicing then in Anapanasati is to come in relationship with the duties that we have, so that we don't shirk our duties, we don't shirk our responsibilities, and by doing our job correctly, we wind up with a very high quality life.
That's an interesting way to look at it and clarifying it. That's good. I appreciate that.
Okay, so continue on then. We've gotten the word secret and we've gotten the word Dhamma.
So, well, if maybe just to continue a little with Dhamma, he says that Dhamma has four aspects. He says nature itself, the law of nature, the duties that must be performed according to that law of nature, and the fruits or benefits that arise from the performance of that duty.
Well, I just covered those things, didn't I?
Yes, indeed. Okay, so then he goes into stage one. And again, this is just like a little summary before a larger sort of discussion later of these subjects. But stage one, flesh body and breath body. And he says, let us examine these four separately, beginning with kaya. And he says, kaya specifically means the groups of elements that are compounded together into a physical flesh and blood body.
Mm-hmm.
Pali word kaya literally means group.
Mm-hmm.
And he says can be applied to any collection of things.
Right. But we use that same way with the word body, like a body of law.
Yeah.
How about a body of water, which could be of any shape or description, with marshland or shores or whatever. So a body of water, that's the word body there. The word kaya is used similarly. And it's talking about it in the sense of a physical collection of things.
Right. And it also says that there's a very important component which nourishes the rest of this body, namely the breath. The breath too is called kaya, and it is a collection of elements.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says,
Yeah, look how, in fact, if you think about it, we can just look at it from the constituency or the air. The air itself is a body or a collection of all kinds of, literally tens of thousands or millions of molecules of nitrogen gas and carbon dioxide and oxygen, O2, all kinds of stuff. But then also you can see it in the body in the sense of look at the effects of what happens inside the body with that air. Look at all of the stuff that's going on with the exchange of the oxygen and giving off of the carbon dioxide and the other pollutions that then go back into the air for the out breath. And so this in breath and the out breath, the air that you breathe out is not the air that you breathe in. It's a completely different body of breath.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't believe me, get under the covers with a friend and breathe on each other. It won't stay long. We like fresh air. We don't want use stale air. And so you can see that the constituent components of that body change with the in breath and with the out breath. So that's also something to note, to notice the difference between what is the air of the in breath and what is the air of the out breath.
Yeah, I'm struck, one of the things about Buddhadasa is that he really, likes to discuss the Pali words and to really dig into them. And one is...
He taught me how to do that. It's one of the most important things because, how to say it? I think that most Western translations of the Dhamma out of the Pali into the English were done by people who wanted to, one, learn Pali, and number two, learn the Dhamma.
Wow.
And because of that, there's many, many, many mistakes that very rarely are you going to have, and we actually need a translation of the Dhamma from someone who already really deeply knows Pali and deeply knows the Dhamma. Only when you have those two things can you get a good translation. And so far, we're still in our first 100 years. We're still in our first generation.
But it's just amazing what a beautiful language it is, and the depth to the words. So on the one hand, you have a word like kaya, which you might just see in the translation body. But then when you look and discuss it, like we have been doing, and you see that there's all these levels to it, it's so much deeper.
Because it's a very regular language with definite endings for the verbs, with the case, the tense, and other things like this, like hoti and honti and homi and homsai, all of these different endings then, and the verb goes at the end of the sentence. For that reason, Pali almost naturally becomes a poetic rhyming language.
Mm.
It's a very beautifully spoken language.
Mm.
And it
Are,
has to, and
are
so
there
the
any Pali speakers? Are there any parts of the world where people speak and write in Pali that you
in
know of?
but not in the English, not the English language speaking people, but I assume that there are in Burma and in Sri Lanka and in Thailand people who can actually hold a conversation in Pali.
Like it's part of their culture, like they were just
Part of their
like
training.
right training. So it's not really a part of larger culture.
Oh
Aren't
no,
there?
we're talking about monks. We're talking about monks who do a lot of chanting, and so they've actually memorized and put a lot of the words to memory.
Right.
Okay, and so the chanting then, as well as the reading it, because we read words and we see them over and over and over again. So this is one of the things that I would say that will help students is. Um, if you want to read Buddhism, read, uh, if you can find it, a way to do that. Any translation will do in English. Doesn't matter who does the translation of what it is, because we're only using it to keep track of the Pali. And so on the internet, on Dhamma Central, you can get line by line, a line of Pali, a line of English, a line of Pali, a line of English, etc., like that. And with that, and it also has a rollover dictionary so that you can go and see that in fact that the translator who translated this stuff did not use the Pali dictionary that is the rollover.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that many translators will get their translation of the word by looking up someone else's translation and then find out what the word in Pali means because they didn't have a clue. There's something else also that I've come to understand, and that is I've got some friends who read and write Thai language, and the Thai have had translations of the Pali for centuries. And in fact, they've got three different, just like in the Bible in American English, you have the New King James Version and the King James and the New English Bible and all of that kind of stuff. So they've got that kind of tradition in Thailand. And so many of the words that are translated in English, if we would go even to the Thai, we'll find out that no, the English language translation of this is wrong, that the Thai is correct.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could go and I would think that that would be the right way to actually translate into English is someone or a set of scholars that are sitting there with the Burmese, with the Sri Lankan, with the Thai, and with the Pali, and with those four languages, they can begin to suss out really what the translation into English should look like.
Mm. Wow.
Because those
Yeah.
other languages have so much more experience at translating into their native language than English is. We're still brand new infants, and the worst of it is that the original translations and the original dictionaries were done by non-Buddhists who were merely interested in the scholarship of the language itself. For that reason, there is so much Christian language built into Western Buddhism that doesn't exist in the Thai version of it. For
Mm.
instance, words like monk, nun, monastery, temple, chanting, the list just goes on and on of all of these English words that come out of Christianity and don't directly reflect what actually the Pali would be.
Well, one of the first books I recall reading that contained suttas and so on was called the Buddhist Bible.
I rest my case. Even
And I
calling
think,
it the Pali Canon is you just can't get out of Christianity.
yeah, yeah, and my understanding, I can't remember who edited the book, but it was actually a very early collection of the suttas, and it was actually mentioned by Jack Kerouac in some of his books as his source, and so it goes back to that point and before. But yeah, that I always sort of looked at that, the Buddhist Bible, and wasn't too happy with that with the title of that, but uh,
I but if you can see the humor in it, then you
yeah.
don't. I mean, why do you choose to be unhappy about it when it's a silly joke?
Well,
Even the author didn't get the punchline to that joke.
yeah. As you said in another video I saw, what I was raised to be miserable by miserable people. So there you go. So
Well, I do talk a lot because I've had a lot of students over the years, and I'm really surprised at some of the quotes that I have said that come back to haunt me. Like that one, I don't remember ever saying that, but it sounds true.
yeah, the exact quote is we're miserable because we were raised by miserable people, but we could lighten up or something like that. I think this.
Mm-hmm.
So the next bit he says here is although we lack the ability to control the general body or flesh body directly, we can master it indirectly by using the breath. If we act in a certain way towards the breath body, there will also be a specific effect upon the flesh body.
Mm-hmm.
And so this distinction here is very important between the flesh body and the breath body. And he returns to it a lot. And
Actually, perhaps a better translation would not be breath body, but body of breath.
Mm.
Now, normally when we think of the body of breath, we're talking about that part of the body that has association with the breathing, which would be the nose, the nostrils, the inside, the throat, down into the lungs, as well as all of the muscles around it. And so the rib cage down to the diaphragm, down to the abdomen is all part of the breath body. And that if you work with the breath body, that will, in fact, affect the whole body. For instance, if you start breathing deeply, the body will begin to feel um, tingly alive all over. Even your fingers and hands will tingle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in the Anapanasati Sutta itself, there is actually, let's say that there is a discussion between Achan Tanisaro and Achan Bodhi, or Bhikkhu Bodhi, about this because in the Anapanasati Sutta, in this body, that Bhikkhu Bodhi actually puts in square brackets of breath, the body of breath. And what he's talking about, the body of breath, is that which, when we're watching the breathing, that's the part of the body that we're watching. In other words, watching your big toe while you're breathing in and out, you don't feel actually the breathing in and breathing out in the foot. But many places in the body, you can distinguish with that part of the body that this is in breath and this is out breath. Rising is different than falling. Okay, so Tanisaro and Bodhi, the conversation is that Achan Tanisaro says, take that phrase that you put in there out, that it doesn't belong in the actual Pali. There is no body of breath exactly in the Pali. And Bhikkhu Bodhi says, but that's part of the tradition. And here Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is actually supporting Bhikkhu Bodhi and not Tanisaro, and I would tend to on my side just because of my communications with him would go with Tanisaro anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is one of the issues within Buddhism, but we can use this understanding of the body of breath,
Right.
and to where with the Goenka method, as you'll notice, he does the scanning. He does definitely talk about it in the sense of the body of the breath. That when we're in that part of the body, to notice the back will expand. That you can get the touch of the cloth. In fact, you can get your entire shirt. You can feel your shirt by noticing the shirt here, noticing the shirt down here, noticing the shirt on the back, noticing the collar of the shirt. All of that can be noticed because it's touching and sensation. And there's tiny little rubbings that are going on while we're breathing in and out. So as we're breathing out, that shirt will move just tiny little bit. And then we breathe in, and then that shirt moves a little bit. So this is the way that we begin to understand the body of breath, but that helps wake us up to the entire body. Now, with the Satipatthana, we bring that in is that when we then take that to all of the postures, walking, standing, sitting, lying, whatever posture you're in, and also when you're in activities, reaching, grasping, touching, eating, defecating, whatever the hands are doing in the Satipatthana Sutta, it says, watch what you're doing. Okay? And we can do that while mindfully breathing in and mindfully breathing out. We can begin to make it a symphony. That in fact, that's a great part of music and dancing. The dancers who are really good at it, they have to be careful of their breathing also,
Yeah.
as well as people who are playing wind instruments. I really like to watch the wind instruments in the symphony orchestras on YouTube to watch their breathing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so the breath body and the whole body are completely interconnected, but that we can't work with the whole body directly, but we can work in our practice with this breath body. Because while we're sitting on the floor, not much is happening. But one thing that is happening is this in breath and this out breath.
Right.
And so we start to pay attention to that. We start noticing this in breath, long in breath, and notice the long out breath. That noting here is then the sati of remember that this is a long breath and remember that this is a long out breath.
Right. Yes. And he goes on to say every kind of breath is noted and analyzed. Long breath, short breath, calm breath, violent breath, fast breath, slow breaths. We should know them all. We
Mm-hmm.
should observe the influence of the different breaths upon the flesh body.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where Bhikkhu Buddhadasa now is pointing out that this Anapanasati is not to be practiced just sitting on the floor in some meditation hall.
Mm-hmm.
And he explains that right there. Because why? Because sitting on the floor in the meditation hall, you're not going to have all of these various kinds of breath. But
Right.
living your life, you will.
Hmm.
Wakey, wakey. Watch what you're doing. Notice that breath.
Right. And to watch the interrelationship between the breath body and how it conditions and affects the flesh body. He says that's the first step.
Mm-hmm.
This in turn will allow us to master the flesh body by means of regulating the breath.
Right.
We discover that by making the breath calm, we can relax the flesh body.
Mm-hmm. Long, slow, deep in breath and long, slow, deep breath, out breath. In fact, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa right there is following along in the Anapanasati Sutta. And the step one would be the long breath. The step two would be the shorter breaths that he's mentioning there, whatever kind of breathing that we have. Then the next one is experiencing the whole body, which is what he's talking about. And that experiencing and watching these long in and out breaths also condition the body into being relaxed,
Right.
which is step 4 of Anapanasati in the sense of the kaya. So the kaya nupassana is um, mindfully breathing long in and out long, and then mindfully breathing what in and out, whatever kind of breathing you are, depending upon the moment, and then experiencing the body, both the breath body and the whole body, and
Right.
then this whole sequence then brings one into a state of relaxation. Now, that state of relaxation doesn't happen automatically. We actually have to fulfill some of the other parts of Anapanasati, the Vedana and the Sita. For instance, if the mind is spinning and burning and angry, that even if we're saying breathing in and angry and breathing out and we're angry, we're still not relaxed when we're upset. So it takes other aspects that are brought together so that the body will relax.
Mhm.
Now, in some descriptions of the first jhana, the 5 main components does not mention relaxation, but in other descriptions of the first jhana, relaxation is actually a component, but it's more of a component of the end result, to where the factors of the first jhana would be removal of the hindrances and bringing the body or mind into a state of satisfaction, relaxation, peace, comfort, security, and then will bring about the relaxation of the body, so we can say and become completely relaxed.
Mhm.
But the way that the sutta is phrased and the way that we look at the Satipatthana, it gives people the false impression that, oh, kaya nupassana needs to be practiced a long time before we ever do any Vedana nupassana. And the answer to that is you can't take the mind into the meditation hall and leave the body and the feelings in the bed. You got to take the whole show in there and work with the whole show. With every breath, the whole show is there. The body, the feelings, the mind objects are all there within one breath. Therefore, we cannot say, I'm going to concentrate on just one aspect of Anapanasati, that we need to make it more like, uh, let us say, music, in the sense that of the piano teacher does not say, okay, Johnny, I'm going to teach you how to play the piano. Today we're going to do C. And we find the note C. Okay, press it. Okay, press it again. Okay, now you go home and you keep pressing C over and over and over again and come back next week and we'll get D. All right. They don't talk about it like that. No, in
Yeah.
order to play, you got to play more than one note together or in sequence right there in that one little passage. You can't spend 3 years on the note C. And yet, a lot of people think that meditation is to be practiced that way. Another silly example is a driving school. You're going to go to this school to learn how to drive an automobile. Well, the first lessons are going to teach you about the steering wheel. And then the second lesson, they're going to teach you about the throttle. And then the
Mhm.
third lesson, they're going to teach you about the gears. And now you're good to go. Come back and we'll give you the fourth lesson about the brakes next week.
Because there are some people who teach this practice as almost mechanically sequential, right? Like you have to do them in order, and you have to just 1, 2, 3, 4 up through 16. And if you're practicing and you get to step 5, the next time you got to start over. And but my understanding of what you're saying is that there's a lot of uh, interpenetration of the different elements.
Here's an example of that that's very clear. You cannot control your breath to make this a long, deep in breath unless you're controlling the mind also. to take that long, deep breath. They work together.
Right.
It's not just long, deep in breath, it's the mind working in conjunction with the body.
Yeah. So it's interesting in reading this. He never makes that point that you can sort of jump around, let's say, within the 16 parts. That's never explicitly said. There's one part where, and I can't remember if it was in the translator's recommendations, where, and we'll find it later as we sort of work through it, but it seems suggested that maybe they're talking about it in a sequential way. So
it looks like it, doesn't it? And in fact, the normal way that the Western mind works, we would think that it would be in sequential. That you get step one down really pat before you go to step two.
right.
But we can't practice that. You can't drive a car like that. You have to be able to manipulate much of the car all at the very beginning.
Yeah.
That any experienced driver that sits down in a new car that they've never sat in before or are going to drive, it would be a good idea for him to make a check of all of the various features he's going to need while driving that car to make sure he knows how to turn on the lights, turn on the windshield wiper, and do all of that kind of stuff, because he might need it on this journey that he's about to go on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for that reason, we're thinking this is also Anapanasati, that it actually has to come together as a unified practice rather than one step after another after another. And this, I think, is one of the problems that people are having when they read the various modern books on Buddhism. Oh, I'm at stage 5.
Right.
Instead of say, today I was stage 1 through 9. 1, 7, 4, 3, 6, 2, 5, 8, back and forth. That's really what's really going on. And if we can see that, then it's liberating.
Mm-hmm.
But if we think that we're in some sort of structure that we've got to do this, and then we got to do that, and then we got to do this, then that actually brings on an arbitrary bondage.
Mm-hmm.
That will prevent students from actually gaining correct practice. Now, another way of looking at it is that, yes, this wasn't described in the sutras because I don't think anybody in the time of the Buddha had that mentality that things had to be done to great detail and perfection in one stage before it goes to the next.
Right.
Just like, I mean, no one would understand that you learn to drive an automobile the way that we were talking about. That it's just naturally people would understand it. Yeah, I've got to learn how to use the brakes before I take this car out on the road.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So why is it that we've gotten the mentality that things have to be done in a certain order because they are discussed in a certain order? We're discussing in a certain order for understanding, but it's to be practiced in whatever order these things come. And especially if we put it in reference to the Eightfold Noble Path, we can see that sati is to remember, then investigation to look at what's going on, and then right effort to go in and make the changes that need to be changed and to change the thoughts. Okay, so this basically is the practice of Anapanasati. So you can say that the first step is step 9, the second step is step 10, the next step would be step 1, and then the next step would be step 7 or 6, and then the next one would be step 5, followed by step 4. Now, in that regard, what that means is to wake up, look at what's going on, take the effort to gladden the mind, then we take a deep breath, and then we feel relaxed and comfortable in the mind. We feel secure and safe, and then the body relaxes.
I mean, it just makes sense, when you explain it that way. having the ability to move around and develop the different elements at different times. It just makes sense. And that you would need to be developing them all sort of simultaneously, and that you need to be switching around
depending upon your limit of time for simultaneously.
Yeah.
You could say that the War of 1812 in the United States and the War of 1812 in Europe happened simultaneously because it was 100 years ago, but in fact they were different times of the year. And so they didn't happen simultaneously, but we think of it as simultaneously because of our time frame reference. So at the nanosecond level, nothing happens simultaneously that you can be aware of because we can't think that fast.
Right. Yeah. 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 That the idea that, so that's a little piece of doctrine I haven't quite nailed down yet. The idea that you can't perceive any one thing exactly simultaneously, right? It has to be one moment at a time.
One mind moment at a time.
Yeah.
And a mind moment lasts about 1/10 of a second, maybe, and that's just kind of general because each individual does their thing. But they have done measurements with reaction time. And there's simple reaction and there's complicated reaction times, in the sense of a simple reaction would be that your screen is red on the website and then they turn it green. And as soon as it turns green, you click the mouse. How long from the time that they change the screen from red to green that you hit the mouse click is normally about 200 to 250 milliseconds. Various differences and various skills that people have had. For instance, down at about 200 milliseconds, they will give you the rating of black belt karate. And if you're down at about 180 milliseconds, then they will say that you're Olympic champion material.
Wow.
Okay, so this is the way that this website was talking about it. But you can also understand that it takes 2 mind moments. The first mind moment is to recognize that it's turned to green, and then the second mind moment is to flip the switch or to click the mouse. And so that fits in directly with, a mind moment lasts about 1/10 of a second, and 200 milliseconds is reaction time with a very simple reaction. Most of our reactions are more complicated, and a more complicated reaction would be, okay, the screen is red, and we may change it to a whole variety of different colors. We've got 15 or different 20 colors. We've got chartreuse, and we've got brown, and we've got black and white and all kinds of colors. But if it turns a particular green, a Kelly green, then you click the mouse. Okay, now that reaction time takes a whole lot longer to get that one right. Now we're up to about 300 milliseconds to 400 milliseconds, which means now it takes 3 or 4 mind moments to make that distinction. Okay, so this is all very interesting research that we're putting on nowadays that the Buddha didn't have any access to at all.
Right.
He was completely empirical, and yet he could still figure all of this stuff out. The more that I understand the modern neuroscience and to see how closely the Buddha fit in with what they're figuring out now is actually mind-blowing. How could he have known all of this stuff 2,500 years ago, and the scientists are just now figuring out how to figure it out?
Yeah. Some powerful concentration to be able to look that deeply.
Except that I wouldn't call it powerful or concentration.
No.
I would call it quick.
Yeah, quick.
Quick. How quick are you? This is reaction time. And a way of looking at it is that instinctually we were raised out of from primitive times where life and everything with it was dangerous. It was a jungle. And the survival of the fittest, one of the survival fitness techniques is if you can react to a predator, if you can see him quick enough to get out of his way, you will survive. And so you have the concept, the quick and the dead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In modern society, it's the quick and the miserable. Okay. So if we are quick enough with our wisdom or quick enough with sati, then we can be quick enough to interfere with our instinctual instant reactions to things. Because basically what we're doing is we're changing the old habit patterns that are based upon instincts. The self-preservation instinct, the way that it talks or the way it communicates is with fear, which means that if the self-preservation instinct gives a false positive, how long did it take us with wisdom to wake up to recognize the fear that I'm feeling right now is inappropriate? This is a false positive that things are in fact pretty safe right now.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that in the reaction of people. Let us say that you had without much warning, because this will happen, that all of a sudden lightning will strike very, very close by, giving a huge bolt of thunder. And everybody jumps. Reaction, right?
Right, yeah.
There was, this happened several years ago, but there was a lightning bolt that struck so close to here that it lit up everywhere. It was a flash of lightning that just lit up everywhere in all directions. It was a flash of lightning immediately followed almost instantly by a clap of thunder that was so loud that the house shook. But the interesting thing about it is that as I was watching this, everyone in the house, including both the dogs, were literally off the floor. Boom, like that. And here I am sitting and watching this stuff and looking at all of these reactions that people are having, to where if you recognize what's going on, you don't have to react to that. You can hear thunder as thunder rather than hearing it as danger.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, how fast are you going to be so that you don't have to have that startle reaction?
Well, yeah. So I gotta say that even when I practice and the bell goes off, I jump almost every time. So my understanding is that some people get to the point where they don't react to a bell; they're not startled. I don't know what that signifies, but I do jump.
Okay, watch that jumping.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Say, watch that jumping.
Watch that jumping. Yes. Yes.
Watch that reaction. Begin to understand that, yes, you can control your reaction time. That you can, in fact, you can bring the mind, you can, because you see, in that reaction time that we were talking about is a contrived situation, because anyone who's going to be taking that test, they know they're taking that test and they're standing there waiting for the screen to turn from red to green. That flash of lightning just came out of the blue, literally. That thunder came right out of the, and people are not going to be ready for it. But if you are ready for anything, then you can react to it in that same reaction time, rather than having rather than having the instinctual reactions instead.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah,
So it's not deep concentration. It's not deep concentration. Deep concentration is not going to buy you this fast reaction time that we're talking about. To remember, to wake up, to keep waking up. That's what sati is to remember, to wake up, to look, to investigate, to be, and the English language word mindfulness just does not give it the power that it needs. That in fact, mindfulness as a word is almost never used in English language other than within Buddhism. It's one of those words that was manufactured in English to fit something in Buddhism because people didn't quite understand. So mindfulness is a mistranslation, and we don't even know what it is. Another one that's like that, by the way, is upekkha, that is translated as into equanimity. But nobody ever heard of the word equanimity until we hear about Buddhism anyway. So I don't understand why they invent these English language words to try to put to convey something when the people are going to misuse that word because they don't know what it means. It's not part of their language anyway. But I believe that everybody understands me very clearly when I use the word wakey wakey. We get that. And that's what we mean by sati, to wake up. Look
Yeah.
at what's going on. What's your reaction time? How quick can you respond to what's going on so that you don't take off in the wrong direction?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I think about my connotations of mindfulness, I sort of get this feeling of mindfulness as sort of a, I don't know, a sort of you're in a smooth continuum, you know, of, I don't know, of awareness. It has a very calm sort of connotation to it, but wakey seems much more, I don't know, alive, you know, much more the present moment. Mindful, it seems to, I don't know, it has this sort of continuum to it. I don't know, but those are just my connotations. But connotations are important, you know. I mean, that's
right. Exactly. If we understand the right connotation, then
it sounds boring.
I'm sorry. What?
Mindfulness, I think, sounds boring, you know. To be mindful, if we think about maybe the way it's used often, you know, it's almost like, okay, you need to be mindful of this. You need to be
Another word
mindful of
that
your
would be
manners.
useful would be careful.
Yeah.
To be careful. We could use that word because we're taking care, and the word care has a lot to do with nurturing. So perhaps a better word than mindful would be to be careful, to be caring. But even that doesn't have quite the value of this sati, to wake up, pay
Right.
attention, look at what's going on, to investigate.
Even the word sati is sort of sharp, you know.
It's a sharp word. It is.
Yeah.
It pokes you. You want to poke into something.
So then he goes into stage 2 and summarizes a bit, and he gets, you know, I like some of the descriptions here. You get the sense that he's very sharp in the way that he describes some things, and I'll give you the example of it. So now he talks about Vedana, the feelings, and he says the Vedana have the greatest power and influence over human beings, indeed over all living things.
Absolutely. Do you understand that? Let me
So
give you a little bit with it.
yeah,
You are driven by your feelings. The
yeah.
feelings are the drive, the motivation behind it, which means that our feelings arise depending upon how our internal representation of what our sensory awareness is. It impacts us, it hits us.
Mhm.
It's almost like pulling the trigger. But the power behind that bullet coming out the barrel is the powder that burns. Okay, that's Vedana. A lot of people think that because there is liking feelings or feeling of pleasant, that they, and I was this way too. I said, okay, well, we have two kinds of feelings, a good feeling and a bad feeling. And then I understand, no, wait a minute, we got two kinds of bad feelings and one kind of good feeling, but at least we're on the road. And what are the three feelings? One is I like it, the other one is I don't like it, and the third one is I'm confused, I don't know whether I like it or not. Okay. And then we come to understand, wait a minute, if I like it ignorantly, then liking it ignorantly will lead to wanting and the feeling of I'm incomplete without it because I want it. That means that all three kinds of feelings, all three, I like it, I don't like it, and I'm not sure whether I like it or not, all three of them are problematic, leading towards dukkha. That there's not a good feeling and bad feelings. There's all bad feelings. There's only one kind of feeling, and that is the feeling that drives us into activities.
Right.
Because of desire based upon liking and not liking. So that's why that power is there. Yes, our feelings drive us everywhere, which means that when we begin to master the feelings, we're not driven so much and there's not so much to do anymore. And so learning to manage our feelings would be an action that would lead then to the end of all kinds of other actions. Because if we just let the feelings go, then we have a lot of traffic of feelings out there. So imagine that it's like an action that leads to the end of action would be like the cops would bring and put a roadblock on the highway. All they have to do is just put a couple of police cars right there on the road, and guess how much traffic they can stop with that.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
this is what the Buddha means by action that brings the end of action. Because all of this action that we're involved with has to do with how we feel about things. And so if we can come to have wise feelings, then we don't have so much to act anymore. There's not so much to do. Because much of the doings that we do is reactions to trying to get rid of the feelings that we have. If we want something, we want to go buy that thing that we want so that we stop feeling like we are missing without it. We'll feel good when we get it. But going and getting it was driven. We were driven to go get it because we felt bad because we didn't have it. We wanted it. Well, now if we don't want anything, now we don't have to go get anything because we don't want anything. We're good to go. We're already okay.
Well, you described it as the gunpowder.
I'm sorry, what was that last?
You described it as the gunpowder, right?
Right.
Yeah, right. So our entire species is forced by the Vedana to do their bidding.
Right, exactly. That gunpowder pushes that bullet out because the gunpowder is going to burn. It demands to be burned. It's got the laws of physics to make that powder burn, and it's going to force that shell out. That happens also in the mind. Once those feelings come up, they are going to force the individual into behaving according to those feelings.
Yeah, he has a very direct way of writing, and the word I used was sharp, almost biting. In the description, you're not. This is not the sort of wishy-washy, super friendly sort of version of the Dhamma that you sometimes get. That just feels like mush. You feel like he's slicing through. Very clear, very direct language. Cutting right to the heart of it. I don't know that I've read a description of Vedana quite like that. And then he goes on
well,
to.
You see, in our society, we love feelings.
Right.
That in fact, if people didn't have feelings, we wouldn't have any business.
Yeah.
Why does how can GM sell cars is if they don't get people to like their cars?
Right.
Or to need their cars. So when you look at it that way, our whole economy, I mean, if everyone, and it's not going to happen, and I don't intend to try to make it happen, but if everybody just woke up a Dhamma dude tomorrow morning, the economy would completely collapse. Because nobody would go to work, nobody would, I mean, everybody's just already happy, so why bother?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, it's so interesting that so much of our economic activity, so little of it is based on need, and so much of it is based on
Feelings.
a consortium of other motivations, feelings that have nothing to do with a need. You know, even food. You know, you think that the purpose of food is to perpetuate the functioning of your
in the West, food is a form of entertainment.
right. Yeah. Oh yeah,
It's
I think
not
at
just
one point,
nourishment or substance. So,
point of the book, bait. so he has this distinction between foods, you know, and he says there's food and then there's bait. And I can't remember exactly how he defines bait, but bait is, you know, a food-like product that really isn't about, you know, nourishing your body. It's about pleasure or other motivations.
well, you can see that directly in the sense of junk food is bait. It doesn't have any nutritional value. And in many cases, if you are very careful, you'll recognize that you don't even like the taste of it. Doritos, for instance. And yet people get addicted to eating Doritos, and part of the reason they do is because of the advertisement and the availability and all kinds of other stuff. But if you really, really tasted a Dorito, you might not want a second one.
Mm. Yeah, it's another curious thing about people is how we seem to get locked into repetition patterns of things that we think are fun, but when we actually examine our experience of doing those things, they aren't fun. And then, so sometimes we keep doing it because we think, well, this is supposed to be fun. And we get locked into it. And that's a lot of what addiction is, you know, are things that we think are fun that actually are not fun, but are destructive, which is probably a lot of what we do.
But they still have that promise. They still have that bait. That's the bait. Yeah. The bait is the promise that is not fulfilled.
Yeah.
For food, it would be the promise that this food tastes good. And in fact, it may not. And an example of that, just not only out of my own past, but this is well known. The example would be yesterday's French fries. Right? Now, French fries, fresh out of the cooker or whatever, is hot and steamy and delicious. But old yesterday's fries are cold and hard and oily and greasy and nothing like yesterday's new French fries. Yesterday's French fries are not delicious. And yet people will look at the French fries and say, these are French fries, and therefore I know what French fries taste like, and they're delicious, and I'll have them. And here they go shoving all of those undelicious French fries in their mouth until all of the French fries are eaten. And they're not enjoying those French fries. They're only enjoying the memories of the French fries that they used to have when they were kids or something.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I've had similar thoughts about macaroni and cheese, the boxed macaroni and cheese and that we have in the United States, Kraft, you know, which at one point I think was the primary staple of my diet for many years as a youth. When I give it to my own child, who also seems to like it, what I've noticed is that there's actually a very small there's a moment when it's very, very watery or like liquidy.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's not too good at that moment because it's kind of like it's soupy. And then the next moment, the soupiness has been completely absorbed by the noodles and it loses its cheesiness, and now it's this kind of sogginess. So there's really no point at which it's actually very good, and then it's really bad the next. Yeah,
And yet it's sold and people buy that product.
and
And
my
it's sold. The
my
interesting part is that if it wasn't sold, it wouldn't get bought. It has to be sold.
right,
And
yeah.
television is the advertisement medium for the selling. And basically what they're selling is convenience so that mom doesn't have to do anything for her kids other than just open a box and throw some stuff in it and here, kid, eat this. I don't care whether you like it or not. Mommy made it.
So it's pretty amazing. And you mentioned the narrative about feelings, is that in so many stories, is that they are really what make us human. They're what separate us from the animals,
No,
and we see,
no, animals are driven by feelings also.
yeah, I think that particularly vegetarians are sort of tuned into that, right? Like the animals seem to have an emotional life, but then the connection being, well, they have feelings, we have feelings, and so we're linked by feelings. And so again, it's based in a sort of valorization of the feeling as something that is what makes us really special. Makes life very special, or the feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you see a statement like this, where he says that our species is forced by the Vedana to do their bidding. It's almost it's interesting, that line. It's almost like a parasite. The connotation of it. We're being forced to do their bidding.
Mm-hmm.
Our entire
Yes.
species is forced to do a bidding. Not a very positive representation, of the feelings.
But you could also hear it in a different language. We, as humans and dogs, are driven by our desires.
Right.
Okay. And
Yeah.
that's a little more modern language that is quite, I mean, anybody can understand that. That's actually part of our lingo, that we are, in fact, driven by our desires. The business community knows this. That's why they want us to desire their product. It's because if they can get us to desire their product, then we will be driven to go get it.
Right. Yes.
So we are driven by our desires, our wants, our tanha, our thirst.
Yeah, it's interesting. Desire. It's also something that often is described in a very positive way. Depression is sometimes described as the lack of a desire. Where somebody just sort of like gives up on their desire for a period of time, and so that's a problem. We got to get people desiring again.
Except that no, that here's the point about that though is that they have to say I want that person in the depression to desire what I want him to desire, rather than for that person in depression to be desiring what he is actually desiring, because in fact depression itself is nothing but a weighted down desire, completely covered with desire, in the sense of don't know where to go, don't know what to do, poor me, pity party, the whole 9 yards of it is all based in desire.
Mm-hmm.
If they were in the place to where I don't want anything and I'm good to go, then they wouldn't be depressed at all. Depression is, in fact, because they're in the state of desiring and not getting what they are desiring. And so they say, poor me, what's the point? I'm no good because I don't have what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And so the business people or the psychologists say, hey, man, don't want what you're wanting. Come want over this. And if you want what I've got for you, I'll give it to you or I'll sell it to you. And then you won't be depressed anymore because you'll. But you can see that, in fact, no, it's not a matter of desire or no desire. It's a matter that there is desire.
Mm-hmm.
And that desire is what drives us, whether it drives us into depression, drives us to suicide, drives us to a PhD, drives us to town. It doesn't matter what it is. It's always desire is the motivating factor under there, mixed with ignorance. And when I'm saying desire, I'm talking about also the desire to destroy, to get rid of. For instance, if the arm has a scratch, or an itch, rather, an itch, we will have the desire to get rid of that itch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is what is called tanha. And tanha is the desire or the explosion that comes out of Vedana. The desire itself then is uh, could be called the Vedana, the want. So we can let's make the distinction this way. If I like it, that's Vedana. But liking gives rise to I want it, and that's tanha.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then if I like it and I want it, then it must be good. And now we're clinging to it as upadana.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I
Mm-hmm.
like it. That's the Vedana that gives us the motivation to go get it. I want it,
Right.
and
Craving.
then craving. That's the
Right.
word for it. Craving is tanha, and we can also use the word thirst or wanting. Because you see the word craving as a really, really strong, powerful word. And when people hear the word craving, they'll say, hey man, I'm not craving anything. Yeah, but you want stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And another one like that is the word dukkha. Dukkha is sometimes suffering. But if you ask the ordinary guy out on the street, hey man, I've got something, I've got the Dhamma for you, and it will eliminate your suffering. And the guy will say, hey man, I'm not suffering, right? But dukkha is more broad than just suffering. It's also just down to the level of any little tiny dissatisfaction. So that we can get into ourselves into a state of satisfaction, now we're out of dukkha.
Yes. So he describes the Vedana. He also describes it as a quote conditioner of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
So creates the conditions and influences the mind.
That statement is actually step 8 of Anapanasati. It is to recognize that Vedana, our feelings, do condition our mind. A
Right.
really, really good example of that is a child walks out on the stage in front of mommy and daddy and the whole family, as well as all the neighbors and the other kids, mommies and daddies, and he has stage fright.
Mm-hmm.
That stage fright then will prevent him from being able to say his lines and he will freeze. That's
Yeah.
it, right
Right.
there. That's Vedana influencing the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Another example of Vedana influencing the mind is when, let us use the example of debate, formal debate, like the debate society and that kind of stuff. One of the rules of the debate society is no attacks. In other words,
Right.
I can attack the opponent for his position, his debating point, but I cannot attack him personally.
Right.
Why? If I attack him personally, that will give him feelings, and those feelings then will interfere with his ability to do the debate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I bring you as an example the 1972 World Chess Championship that was between Boris Spassky and Bobby Fischer. I tell this story from time to time. Bobby Fischer was an American who won that championship by subterfuge. That in fact, Boris Spassky was well known to be the very best champion of chess in the world, but Bobby Fischer brought more tools into there than just the chess. He played psychological warfare against Boris Spassky.
Mm.
What would he do? Several things. One was in chess, if you touch a piece, you've got to move it.
Mm.
What Bobby Fischer would do is he would take and he would hover his hand over that chess piece, wobble it around like that, and have the entire audience and Spassky and everybody think that he's going to move that chess piece next because he's dancing around it with the idea that but he's not really physical touching it. So he hasn't broken the rule yet. And so if he moves another piece, he can point out, hey, I didn't touch it.
Mm.
Right? That was one of the things he did. Another thing he did was when it was Spassky's time to move, Bobby Fischer would get up out of his chair and walk around the stage and get behind Spassky and look over his shoulder. And that completely discombobulated Spassky. He didn't know what to do about the fact that Bobby Fischer was behind him, looking over his shoulder rather than sitting across from him at the chessboard. In the 2016 presidential elections, Donald Trump did exactly the same thing to Hillary Clinton. He stalked her while she was trying to um,
Yeah.
give her talk, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
There he is. That's step 8 of Anapanasati. But now we're looking at it as how negative emotions will condition the mind. We can also understand that if we can begin to control those emotions, then we can condition the mind more directly with wholesome stuff rather than conditioning it with unwholesome feelings.
Right. Yeah. He says if we master the Vedana, we will master the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you can master your feelings, you are the master of your world. If you can feel the way you want to feel, how would you feel?
Mm.
That's part of the practice. That's an integral part. That's if you want to think of it as a meaningful one-liner or even a secret.
Mm.
That's it. To master your feelings is to master the world.
Yeah, it's
You don't
powerful
have
stuff.
to fix the world, by the way. The world's not broken. What's broken is the way we feel about the world.
Mm.
And if we can if we can master those feelings, then so let's take that for a moment. If you can master your feelings, then how would you feel if it was your choice? Most people don't have a choice because they're not aware that they've got a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, but they think that the feelings are the boss. I am sad. I
Right.
am happy. Okay. When you say I am sad, what that means is that sadness has taken over and I have become that sadness. I am that sadness. I defined myself in this moment by using the word sad, right?
Yeah.
But that's a choice. You have a choice. Are you going to feel sad or not? You don't have to feel sad. You can feel any way you want to if you remember to feel any way you want to and you develop the skills of feeling the way that you want to. And there it is, right in the Anapanasati Sutta. The skills to be developed is the skill of sukha,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
piti, to
Mm-hmm.
become the winner, to become the satisfied with the way things are. That's the feeling that we want to have, is the feeling of nurturing and friendship, as opposed to the feeling of criticism. Of,
Mm-hmm.
I like this and I don't like that. That's how you become a master of the world, is by mastering your own feelings. feel the way you want to feel.
Yeah, he says by eliminating these pleasant feelings, we obtain something even better in return. We receive another kind of Vedana, a higher order of Vedana.
Mm-hmm. Which is what I've just been talking about. That higher order Vedana is Sukha.
Yeah.
So funny, I keep getting ahead of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa when I'm trying to describe what we're talking about. You mention it, and then I say more about it. It's the next thing he says.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. And so, yeah, he sort of concludes this little summary of that second stage by saying, and so it's interesting because he calls the breath the body conditioner,
Mm-hmm.
And actually uses that language in the translation. So we analyze that body conditioner.
It's very, very important for you to understand that. Let me expound upon that a little bit for understanding, because that is in fact the absolute correct word, conditioner, as opposed to cause. That in fact the cause and effect or causality and all of that kind of stuff that we see in the physical world, we take that into the mental world also, or into Anapanasati, and talk about cause and effect. In the Paticca Samuppada, for instance, that Pasa causes Vedana, and Vedana causes Tanha, and Tanha causes Upadana, is not the right way to look at it. A much better way to look at it is that they condition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so our thoughts condition our feelings, and our feelings condition our thoughts. Just like the breath will condition the body, the breath doesn't cause the body, but it causes a condition for the body to make some changes. For instance, if you're not breathing well, if you're depressed, not breathing, and then you start breathing well, the body will wake up. Or if you're tired and the mind is not in good shape, then you can take a few deep breaths and bring the mind right back out of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the right word is conditioner. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and Satyakaro, they've got that one spot on. That was absolutely correct. It's a conditioner. It's not a cause.
Yeah, it put a lot together to hear it described in that way. Yeah, and he says, so we analyze the body conditioner until we know it in great detail and how it conditions the body.
Mm-hmm.
Then, by regulating the body conditioner, we master the body.
Mm-hmm.
This way, we make
regulating. There we go. There it is. Controlling the breath. The Bhikkhu Buddhadasa right there, regulating the breath. I'm glad that you're reading this to reinforce the fact that I did learn it from him correctly. Because a lot of people say, oh, you're not supposed to control the breath, especially from the Burmese. But here Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is making it plain and straight that you, by knowing the breathing, you begin to regulate it. You begin to control it, monitoring it, watching it, and writing herd over it.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Just like the cowboy taking the old Chisholm Trail and taking the cows up to the railhead, the cowboy does not cause the cows, but he does condition them to market.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, maybe we should do. Maybe there's a spiritual reading that can be done on the movie Red River with John Wayne. Maybe it's all. Yeah, maybe it's all an allegory for I don't know. Learning to condition and not master, or control. Condition, not control. So in this way, we make the body calmer and more peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise,
relax. Take a deep breath and sigh and relax.
yes. Likewise, that which conditions the mind is feeling. We calm the mind by controlling the Vedana so that they do not condition or stir up the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Thus, the first stage regarding the Kaya and the second stage regarding the Vedana follow the same basic principle and are similar in their method of practice.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's a good point to sort of end for today. What do you think?
All right. Okay. Yeah, we've been at it nearly 2 hours now, so I think that we can. Um, I hope that you've gotten some value out of
Oh,
this.
yeah. Well, it's one thing to sort of read it on your own, and it's quite another to put it into dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
It really brings it out. So yeah, I found that quite enjoyable, and we could continue along these lines if you found it fruitful yourself.
Um, okay, that will be a long, slow slog, but we can do it that way. Um, and that in this regard, it also has the value that the way that I'm discussing this on Skype actually fits in with that book because there's a few places where I would make some changes to the book. And sometimes students will catch me out on that. But you teach different than the book is here, and so I've got to go back and put all that together again. But I'm glad that you're reading out of the part of the book that I've got down pretty well. So, but there's more to it than just that. But yeah, we can finish with that book, and then we can go off into other things. But the important part is that we need to learn how to practice Anapanasati because it's actually an easy thing to practice once we get the proper understanding. So all we're doing with reading the book together and that kind of stuff is to getting to the point of understanding that this is a practice that is to be done right now.
Right.
That is, and that as we're doing this practice right now, we'll develop the skills so that we get better at it.
Mm-hmm.
A really clear example of that would be like with sukha. If we're going to develop sukha, we have to practice sukha. Would be very much like someone who wanted to play the piano, bought the books for the piano, hired a teacher, and then has his first lesson, and then the next week he doesn't practice the piano; he practices the violin. Well, practicing the violin for the week, plus the book and the piano and the teacher, be enough for him to learn to play the piano?
Mm.
Probably not. No, he's got to do the extra thing of actually practicing the piano itself.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that we actually have to practice sukha.
Mm-hmm.
We have to practice telling ourselves we feel good. We have to practice telling ourselves this is okay, to gladden the mind, to bring up this sukha. Everything is safe right now. Look around. No alligators, no mafia, no police. Everything is okay.
Mm.
Okay, so this is the way that we practice is to gladden the mind and bring the mind out of that muck or mire, the depression, the anger, whatever it was, so that you can feel the way that you want to feel, because otherwise you will spend your life driven by your feelings
Right.
instead of having the feelings that you want to have. And if you have the feelings you want to have, then you do what you want to do, which is probably not very much.
Mm.
Okay, so let's leave it there. I very much enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for bringing this book. And by the way, this is not the only one. There are actually 4 books in print,
Mm.
but not all of them are in English.
So I did pick up a few. So I also got this one, which is
Hang on, I move it over to this part of the screen. Move it now. It's too close. Okay, bring it back a little bit. Okay.
the Heartwood.
Oh, the Heartwood of the Bow Tree. Yes, I know that one. Yes, that's a series of 3 lectures on emptiness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. And then he's got a book. I think it's called Under the Bodhi Tree. But
that's the newest one. That one was done. That's actually an anthology that was put together by Santikaro and published in 2017.
mm-hmm.
Sony, that's the new book out. Where there's Heartwood, that's from the 60s.
Yeah. And I'm very interested in it in light of his sort of non-dual ideas. I'm very, very curious where he goes.
His emptiness about that is quite funny. Empty is empty.
Yeah.
Empty is automatically unity, in the sense of how can you have 2 emptinesses? Emptiness is empty. You don't have 2 of them.
And there's one other book I found. I think it's called Me and Myself.
Mm-hmm.
It's an anthology of shorter pieces. Mm-hmm. So it includes, I don't think it's the whole thing, but it's a section of Handbook for Humanity. And No Religion is in there. And then Dhamma, Socialism, Dhammic Socialism, and a few other pieces. So that'll be good. My understanding is those are some of his better known and influential works.
There's one other book I would like for you to start reading. The one between your ears.
Who was it? Somebody said.
Remember to read the book between your ears. Watch what the mind is doing. Watch this Vedana. Watch these feelings. Watch this mental conditioning going on. Begin to understand that you are, in fact, driven by your feelings.
Yeah.
Start noticing that. Read that book very, very well so that you know for sure that you're driven by your feelings, because you may not be driven so much by them anymore. Because you can see that connection. You can see that conditioning.
Yeah, I'm a strange beast. I tend to be sort of hyper, intellectual, wrapped up in my brain, but at the same time, sort of like highly emotional, and there's this strange sort of interplay between those elements. But I am practicing regularly, so I have a twice a day practice, morning practice, evening practice, and it's
how many times can you remember a day to watch your breath? I have seen it written that every individual, more or less, depending upon many conditions, but we will have thousands of breaths a day, maybe 10,000 breaths a day. How many of them are you going to be mindful of? How many of them are you going to notice? Now you're saying you practice twice a day. Does that mean that you notice 2 breaths out of the day? You can do better than that.
It's a funny thing about the Dhamma, is that one, so it starts out as, maybe you practice once a day for a little bit, and then you expand your practice. And then what you begin to see is the way it begins to emerge throughout the day. here, there, and
If you are developing the skill of sati while you're sitting on the cushion or whatever terminology you want to use, then you're already developing that skill and it will pop up throughout the day by itself. What I'm inviting you to do is intentionally make it pop up.
yeah.
Make this your point of view that I'm going to, as every breath that I can remember, I will do it mindfully.
Mm-hmm.
Mindfully breathe in. Pardon?
Unremittingly, I think I've heard you say it should be.
Unremitting mindfulness can only be done by keep bringing it back and keep bringing it back and keep bringing it back over and over and over again. And so um, you can see where the practice of the Satipatthana gives the people the idea of sitting on the floor and doing what they call meditation, doing it once a day, twice a day. Anapanasati practice, though, is in every posture throughout the day whenever you remember it. So we can bring up anchors so that we can have more and more anchors that will give us more and more opportunities to be here now so that you become here now when you need to be here now. So that the Vedana doesn't come up and drive things, that we can have sati come up when that Vedana comes up and we can say, wait a minute, I don't have to act on that feeling of not liking.
Right. And you can use the breath as a conditioner to, if you feel the sensations of anxiousness or whatever it is in the body,
Then you can breathe into that anxiousness. Exactly. You can feel that anxiety and you know where it is in the body, but most people hate it. They want to get rid of it. That in fact, one of the ways of getting rid of anxiety is go do something. And so when we're sitting there in anxiety, we have the idea that, oh, I feel this way because something needs to be done. I don't feel safe. And so the story that I have is that the old man in the old hovel many centuries, thousands of years ago, is laying on the floor in his hut and he feels anxious. And his idea is, oh, I feel anxious because the fence needs to be fixed. And so he goes out into the night, no electricity, finds rocks and fixes the fence to keep the wolves out and the goats in. He goes back in and he lays down on the floor again. And guess what? The anxiety comes back. But maybe that anxiety was there, but while he was working on the fence, he wasn't noticing the anxiety. He was busy.
Right.
And so that gives us the delusion that our activity keeps us from being in a state of anxiety, where in fact, no, the busyness means that we're no longer dealing with the anxiety. Now we're trying to get rid of it by doing something indirect. The right way to deal with anxiety is look at it directly. Breathe into it. Can you make friends with it? Can you move it around? Can you, when breathing in, make it big, and when you breathe out, make it small? Can you move it from this part of the chest down to that part of the chest? Can you play with it? Can you turn it into a toy? This is the way that we work with it, by paying attention directly to it, knowing that you can change this. You can manipulate the way you feel. You don't have to feel anxious and uptight. You can take a deep breath and relax instead.
Yeah, it's funny. We've sort of talked about children and how many of them seem to innately understand this sort of attitude of playfulness, curiosity, good humor in the moment, in the present moment. And then as life goes on, so for instance, for myself, the strategy, so basically what I trained myself to do was to derive satisfaction through accomplishing tasks.
Mm-hmm.
So you go to school and you say, okay, here's what I got to do today. I got to read this story. I got to write this essay. I got to go here. I got to go there. I got to go to the attendance office. I got to talk. I got to make a call. And then when you do all those things, you feel good because you moved forward.
Until
Right.
you think of the next thing that needs to be done.
And then, until the next thing. And then every day is a series of tasks meant to move you forward towards a future goal. And for a lot of people who go to school, or they're pursuing a career, that's how they train themselves, is, did I do things,
And
if
so their lives then are driven by bad feelings.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was saying. That's it. Right there. You got it. Which means now that if you can change the way you feel, you can take over the world. And that does not mean that you can win the election and become the next Donald Trump. What we're talking about being a champion of the world is your own world, because you create your own world.
Well, they're all props, right? They're all mechanisms to try to create a new feeling. So if I have a list of tasks and I accomplish a task and I put a line through it, that task was really a mechanism to try to create a feeling of goodness.
Of comfort. And now you're beginning to understand, hey, we can create those feelings directly. We don't have to go do that task. We don't have to go repair the wall to get rid of the anxiety.
Right.
We can work with the anxiety directly.
Yeah, the implications of that are pretty astonishing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wakey.
So, I'm going for it.
Excellent, Alan. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, let's bring this one to a close and we'll talk later.
Okay.
Enjoy your practice. Go read that book. It's got something in there to check out. Yeah,
somebody, I can't remember who made that analogy. They said that you should approach your meditation in a similar way to the way you would approach reading a really good book. With that sort of attention and that interest and that
focus. Until the breath becomes so good that you can't put it down. Right.
That should be the attitude.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And as a reader, I can appreciate that analogy. So.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you once again. I think this was very, very fruitful for me. I appreciate it. Excellent. Okay, be well.
May you have all the good feelings you want.
You too. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.